Proceedings are resumed.
The Penal Code Amendment Bill 2016.
Recognize the Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill, the long title of which is a bill for law to amend the Penal Code 2013 revision to provide for a new graduated scale of increased maximum terms of imprisonment in relation to the default of payment of cost, compensation, or fines ordered by a court in criminal trials and for incidental and connected purposes.
So ordered. Does the Honorable Attorney General wish to speak to the bill?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's a fairly short bill. And it is part of the legislative changes or the parcel of legislative changes I spoke about this morning to make sure that we have proportionate and dissuasive penalties in legislation. Madam Speaker, Clause 2 of the bill repeals and replaces Section 30 of the Penal Code, 2013 revision. And just for completeness, I'll just read the first part of Section 30 of the Penal Code, Madam Speaker. It says, in the absence of express provision in any law relating thereto, the term of imprisonment ordered by a court in respect of the non-payment of any sum adjudged to be paid for cost under Section 34 or compensation under Section 33 or in respect of the non-payment of a fine or any sum adjudged to be paid under the provisions of any law shall be such terms as, in the opinion of the court, will satisfy the justice of the case, but shall not exceed in any case the maximum fixed by the following scale. And that scale, Madam Speaker, is if the fine or the compensation is $1,000, then the maximum period would be 1 month. If you don't pay that fine. Or if it's $1,000, then the default term is 4 months, and so on. So what this bill does, Madam Speaker, is repeal and replaces that section to provide for increased maximum terms of imprisonment for non-payment of cost, or for the non-payment of compensation, or the non-payment of fines ordered by the court in criminal trials. So whereas, Madam Speaker, under the current construct of the law, the maximum term of imprisonment which can be imposed in relation to such non-payment is 6 months. That is, Madam Speaker, the maximum that a court can order in default of a non-payment is 6 months at the moment. Under the proposed amendment, the terms of imprisonment provided for would range, Madam Speaker, from a minimum of 1 month to a maximum of 14 years, depending on the amount of fines, costs, or compensation. I need to emphasize, though, Madam Speaker, that these amounts are maximum amounts. Therefore, a sentencing judge still retains the discretion to impose a lower period of sentence in default where the justice of the case requires that. So further, Madam Speaker, to guarantee proportionality, the term of imprisonment imposed in default cannot exceed the term of imprisonment that could have been imposed at the time of conviction. However, where the offense is punishable with a fine only, the term of imprisonment imposed in default cannot exceed 6 months. And finally, where the fine or other sum has been partly paid, the term of imprisonment in default shall be reduced by the ratio by which the amount of part payment bears to the amount of such fines. In other words, Madam Speaker, if you pay part of the or you serve part of the sentence or you pay part of the fine, then the default term has to reflect the fact that a portion of it has been paid and discounted accordingly. So, Madam Speaker, the amounts are set out in the bill itself. For example, the amounts are set out in the schedule in the law there, Madam Speaker. So an amount of, where you're ordered to pay an amount of $100 or less, and it is not paid, the maximum term that you could do for that non-payment is 1 month. And the other extreme, of course, is that if you are ordered to pay a fine of, say, $1.3 million or a cost of $1.3 million, and you refuse to pay that, then the maximum the court could say is that you pay the $1.3 million or you serve 14 years imprisonment. Now, even though the 14 years imprisonment is there, the judge still has the discretion to say you pay $1.3 million or you only do 6 months imprisonment. So that is the default position, Madam Speaker. So it is replacing what used to be the maximum, which is 6 months, irrespective of how high the fines or the default term, the compensation order was. The maximum you could do, unless the law expressly provided otherwise, the maximum you could do was 6 months. This has now replaced that to say that you can do a minimum of 1 month, a maximum of 1 month, or maximum of 14 years, depending on the justice of the case, Madam Speaker. So I hope I've explained the bill sufficiently. I commend it to honorable members. Thank you.
Does any member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Final call. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Madam Speaker, thanks to honorable members for their support of the bill. Thank you very much.
The question is that the bill shortly entitled the Penal Code Amendment Bill 2016 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. I believe the ayes have it. The Penal Code Amendment Bill 2016 has been given its second reading.
The Police Law Amendment Bill 2016.
Recognize the Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move for the second reading of a bill, the long title of which is a bill for a law to amend the Police Law 2014 revision, to make provisions for regulations to be made to permit the sharing of information with other law enforcement or regulatory agencies as required for compliance with international standards relating to the prevention of money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation financing, and for incidental and connected purposes.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the Honorable Attorney General wish to speak to the bill?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, Madam Speaker. Distributor. Madam Speaker, I just reminded the clerk that there was a committee stage amendment that has been circulated in respect to this. Madam Speaker, there are still some concerns on the part of some members of the RCIPS as to whether aspects of the current legislative framework, and as the current now mean combined legislative framework, provide the necessary comfort, the protection in the sharing of certain information with certain regulatory or other law enforcement entities, Madam Speaker, both locally and abroad. So, honorable members will recall that recently the Confidential Information Disclosure Law 2016 was promulgated, and it addresses some of the issues relating to international cooperation and the sharing of information generally. But there remains concern within the RCIPS, Madam Speaker, that its members could potentially be exposed, if you will, to certain actions when sharing information, particularly while in the process of providing overseas assistance, or in some instances while providing investigative assistance within these jurisdictions, within the Cayman Islands itself, to customs and, say, immigration. In other words, Madam Speaker, there's an absence of a clear legislative protocol or gateway which facilitates the sharing of information, certain information, that is, in respect of police to customs, police to immigration, and police to other law enforcement agencies, or even to SEMA for that matter, regulatory agencies. Now, it is taken as a given, Madam Speaker, that these things have been and continue to be done, but there need to be some more certainty in terms of how this is to be dealt with. Madam Speaker, in addition to those concerns, honorable members will be aware that the government mentioned that we are looking at the whole issue of how to treat with certain beneficial ownership information where that is required, Madam Speaker, for law enforcement or regulatory purposes, how to treat with sharing that information and ensuring balancing privacy whilst meeting our international obligation to ensure that our financial services industry is not used for nefarious activities. So, Madam Speaker, the necessary safeguard needs to be put in place to ensure that information can be properly shared where there's a demonstrable need for it for law enforcement or regulatory purposes and so. Madam Speaker, probably it would help if I just point out what the interpretive note to the FATF recommendation 40 requires as it relates to exchange of information for international cooperation purposes. Madam Speaker, it reads as follows. It says exchange of information between law enforcement authorities. Law enforcement authorities should be able to exchange domestically available information with foreign counterparts for intelligence or investigative purposes relating to money laundering, associated predicate offenses, or terrorist financing, including the identification and tracing of the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime. Law enforcement authorities should also be able to use their powers, including any investigative techniques available in accordance with their domestic law, to conduct inquiries and obtain information on behalf of foreign counterparts. The regimes or practices in place governing such law enforcement cooperation, such as the agreements between Interpol, Europol, or Eurojust, and individual countries, should govern any restrictions on use imposed by the requested law enforcement authority. Law enforcement authorities should be able to form joint investigative teams to conduct cooperative investigations, and when necessary, countries should establish bilateral or multilateral agreements to enable such joint investigations. Countries are encouraged to join and support existing anti-money laundering, combating finance of terrorism law enforcement networks, and to develop bilateral contacts with foreign law enforcement agencies, including placing liaison officers abroad in order to facilitate timely and effective cooperation. And finally, Madam Speaker, it says countries should permit their competent authorities to exchange information indirectly with non-counterparts, applying the relevant principles above. Indirect exchange of information refers to the requested information passing from the requested authority through one or more domestic or foreign authorities before being received by the requesting authority. Such an exchange of information and its use may be subject to the authorization of one or more competent authorities of the requested country. And the competent authority that requests the information should always make it clear for what purpose and on whose behalf the request is made. And countries should also encourage to permit a prompt and constructive exchange of information directly to non-counterparts. So, Madam Speaker, that's the international benchmark against which we are seeking to put in place the necessary legislative protocol to ensure that the Cayman Islands is in compliance with the relevant FATF standards. And so, Clause 2, Madam Speaker, of the bill seeks to amend Section 146 of the police law so that in regulations made under the police law, provision may be made to permit the sharing of information between appropriate members of the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service with other law enforcement or regulatory agencies, Madam Speaker, local as well as overseas, for purposes of conducting or providing assistance with a criminal investigation or relevant or related investigations. Madam Speaker, these regulations may be used, among other things, to legislate the protocol to be utilized in providing the assistance via international cooperation and beneficial ownership information pursuant to any agreement entered into by the government of the Cayman Islands with other countries. And so, Madam Speaker, in short, all that is being done is that the law has been amended to provide for the making of bespoke regulations, if you will, to establish a proper protocol for the sharing of information where that is required as a matter of international standards for the prevention of money laundering, terrorist financing, and other serious and organized crime, and so on. Madam Speaker, there is a committee stage amendment that is being proposed to clarify some of the language in the bill. But as is, I certainly commend the bill to honorable members of this House. I thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Final call. Does any other member wish to speak? Honorable Attorney General, I recognize you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank honorable members for their tacit support of the proposal in the bill. Thank you.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Police Law Amendment Bill 2016 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. Believe the ayes have it. Accordingly, the Police Law Amendment Bill 2016 has been given its second reading.
Proceeds of Crime Amendment Bill 2016.
Recognize the Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill, the long title of which is a bill for a law to amend the Proceeds of Crime Law 2016 revision to make further changes necessary for compliance with international standards relating to the prevention of money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation of financing, and for incidental and connected purposes.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the Honorable Attorney General wish to speak to it?
Yes, Madam Speaker, thank you. Madam Speaker, honorable members would recall that earlier this year, a set of amendments to this very law, the Proceeds of Crime Law, were brought before this House. And those amendments, Madam Speaker, served the purpose of addressing what was identified at the time as certain deficiencies within our legislative framework dealing with our anti-money laundering, combating the financing of terrorism institutional framework, and which were identified during the National Risk Assessment, which was conducted, Madam Speaker, some time ago, and which, of course, is meant to be a precursor to the upcoming fourth round of mutual evaluation by the CFATF. Madam Speaker, after further review, it was agreed that the Proceeds of Crime Law requires some further tweaking in order to ensure full compliance, of course, with those FATF recommendations. So this bill, Madam Speaker, the Proceeds of Crime Amendment number 2 bill, is a second wave of amendments to this law and is aimed at addressing some of the weaknesses that have been identified, as mentioned earlier. Madam Speaker, the Clause 1 sets out the short title. Clause 2, Madam Speaker, this clause amends Section 2 of the principal law by inserting a definition for the term designated non-financial business or profession. Madam Speaker, the term was included in the Proceeds of Crime Law by way of an early amendment this year, but there were no accompanying definition that was provided. So it also now amends the section by inserting a new provision which would enable Cabinet, by order, Madam Speaker, which is going to be subject to an affirmative resolution from the Legislative Assembly, to amend the law's Schedule 6, and which would provide a list of activities falling within the definition of relevant financial businesses. So once Cabinet amends the schedule, Madam Speaker, by way of an order, that order will be subject to an affirmative resolution by this Legislative Assembly in the interest of transparency, of course, and so on. Madam Speaker, Clause 3, this clause seeks to amend Section 4.9 of the principal law by deleting the reference to the money laundering regulations as a source of the definition of the term relevant financial business. This amendment, Madam Speaker, is necessary because an early amendment to the Proceeds of Crime Law had removed that term from the money laundering regulations where it was originally to be found. Clause 4, Madam Speaker, is a very minor amendment to correct some errors there, a wrong reference to some subsections in Section 15 of the law. Clause 5, Madam Speaker, this clause amends Section 1151, that's 115, subsection 1 of the Proceeds of Crime Law, so that, Madam Speaker, the initial 48 hours for which cash seized under Section 114 may be detained does not include any Saturdays or excluded day. This law is therefore being amended to state that cash seized under Section 114 may be detained initially for a period of 48 hours, which shall not include any Saturday or an excluded day. Madam Speaker, just for clarity, what this section deals with is the ability of customs or the police to seize cash in certain circumstances where they have reason to believe that the money is going to be used for unlawful purposes. And the customs is allowed to seize that money. And what this is saying is that it can be seized initially for a 48-hour period. And that 48-hour period should not include, when you're calculating that period, you should not use Saturdays or exclude day. So it will be, in effect, 48 hours business day. And so, Madam Speaker, Clause 6 amends Section 145 of the Principal Law so that the entities to which Cabinet may, the entities with which Cabinet may consult prior to approval of regulations made under the law will include the Anti-Money Laundering Steering Group. So, Madam Speaker, when Cabinet is making regulations under this legislation, one of the groups that they will be required to consult with is the Anti-Money Laundering Steering Group. For members' benefit, Madam Speaker, I'm sorry. Yeah. For members' benefit, Madam Speaker, the Anti-Money Laundering Steering Group comprises of the Attorney General, who is the chairman, Chief Officer in the Ministry of responsible for financial services, the Commissioner of Police, Collector of Customs, Managing Director of Monetary Authority, the Solicitor General, the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the Chief Officer or Director responsible for the department that deals with designated non-financial services business, which at the moment is the Ministry of Financial Services. So those are the members of the Anti-Money Laundering Steering Group. And Cabinet will be required, Madam Speaker, to consult with this body when making regulations. And for good reason, Madam Speaker, because part of the remit of this body is to oversee government's anti-money laundering policies. Madam Speaker, there are other minor amendments contained in the bill, but Clause 7 is meant, this clause amends Schedule 6, Madam Speaker, of the law. And the purpose there is to expand the activities considered to be relevant financial businesses, so as again to comply with international standards as set out by the Financial Action Task Force. So this, Madam Speaker, is really a sort of another set of tidying up exercise, if you will, in order to ensure that we are hopefully fully compliant with the international benchmark as set out by the Financial Action Task Force in their 40 revised recommendation, Madam Speaker. I certainly commend the bill to this House, and to point out, Madam Speaker, I think there is also a committee stage amendment as this is concerned. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Final call. Does any other member wish to speak? Recognize the Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly thank honorable members for their support. I thank you. Madam Speaker, may I just use the opportunity? I know there will be a third reading, but I'll just use the opportunity to thank all those who have been involved, both from the drafting department, the Ministry of Financial Services, and others who have been instrumental in ensuring that we have these amendments in place, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled The Proceeds of Crime Amendment Bill 2016 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. Believe the ayes have it. The Proceeds of Crimes Amendment Bill 2016 has been given a second reading.
The Misuse of Drugs Amendment Bill 2016.
I recognize the Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to move a bill shortly entitled the Misuse of Drugs Amendment Bill 2016.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the Honorable Premier wish to speak to the bill?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this bill, this amendment to the misuse of drugs law is to deal with the issue of legalizing the use of cannabis oil for medicinal purposes. In November of last year, the government was approached by Mr. Denny Warren with a proposal which would require the amendment of the misuse of drugs law regulations and the pharmacy law regulations to allow for cannabis oil to be prescribed by a doctor as treatment for medicinal purposes such as cancer and to control seizures. Mr. Warren, who has been very public about the issues involving the illness his wife is suffering, stated that his wife had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and that they had exhausted all traditional methods of treatment and were willing to give the cannabis oil a try. He told us that he had done his research and read survivor testimonies about the impact of cannabis oil, the positive impact of cannabis oil, and he felt that this option would give his wife some hope. After this presentation to the caucus, Madam Speaker, on behalf of the government, I instructed the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Health to establish a committee of relevant stakeholders, including medical professionals, to research, discuss, and report on the issues or concerns should the government decide to legalize the importation of cannabis oil for medical use. A report was received and considered by caucus. The caucus also obtained advice from the Attorney General, as one would expect. And we took all of those into consideration. I say quite frankly, Madam Speaker, that there were and remain some reservations about the use of this oil for this purpose, because it is still there is still questions about its efficacy, and nowhere in the world really have they yet been able to determine definitively that it has the curative effects that many of its advocates believe. But, Madam Speaker, there is no doubt, I think, in anyone's mind, I've talked to many people about this now, that it is very useful in dealing with a range of symptoms that arise from serious illness, not just cancer, but indeed AIDS and other serious illnesses. Madam Speaker, I announced in the contribution to the budget and throne speech debate that the government had taken a decision to proceed to have the necessary work done to amend the legislation to allow the various pieces of legislation to allow for the importation and use of cannabis oil for medical use. And so in April of this year, we advised the Chief Officer of the Ministry of Health that a policy decision had been made by the government to proceed with developing legislation to allow for the importation of cannabis oil for medical use only. And Madam Speaker, that is how we have come to this point today. I would like to outline the proposed amendments in the Misuse of Drugs Amendment Bill, or proposed by the Misuse of Drugs Amendment Bill 2016. The amendment bill is quite short, Madam Speaker. It is made up of only 4 clauses. And for the purposes of the law, cannabis oil means cannabis extracts and tinctures of cannabis. Clause 1 of the bill provides a citation and the title as the Misuse of Drugs Amendment Law 2016. Clause 2 provides for the amendment of the definition and interpretation section. The definition of authorized is amended to provide that for the purposes of prescribing, administering, or supplying cannabis extracts and tinctures of cannabis, an authorized person is restricted to a medical doctor, a pharmacist, a person conducting the business of a retail pharmacy or an importer, or a person in possession under a prescription. Only a medical doctor, pharmacist, a person lawfully conducting the business of a pharmacy or an importer can respectively prescribe, administer, or supply cannabis extracts and tinctures of cannabis. Clause 3 of the bill provides for the insertion of a new section 2A, which provides that, among other things, the use of cannabis extracts and tinctures of cannabis for medical or therapeutic purposes, where it is prescribed by a medical doctor for a person under the medical doctor's care, is lawful. The medical doctor shall establish the dosage and frequency for the patient. Madam Speaker, this amendment will allow for the medical doctor to prescribe cannabis extracts and tinctures of cannabis as part of a course of treatment for a person under his or her care. In addition, the Cabinet may make regulations providing for the importation, transport, storage, and dispensing of cannabis extracts and tinctures of cannabis. Clause 4 provides for the amendment of Schedule 1 by the insertion of cannabis extracts and tinctures of cannabis in the appropriate alphabetical sequence in the list of controlled drugs. This description of cannabis extracts and tinctures of cannabis means the separated resin, crude or purified, obtained from the cannabis plant. Madam Speaker, this description was adopted in amending the legislation, as this is the description used in the list of narcotic drugs under international control prepared by the International Narcotics Control Board. The International Narcotics Control Board is the independent and quasi-judicial monitoring body for the implementation of the United Nations International Drug Control Conventions. The production and distribution of controlled substances must be licensed and supervised, and governments must provide estimates and statistical returns to the International Narcotics Control Board on the quantities of drugs required, manufactured, and utilized. Madam Speaker, other amendments have been made to the Customs Prohibited Goods Amendment Order and the Pharmacy, Poisons, and Restricted Pharmaceuticals Amendment Regulations. These amendments will subsequently come into force once the amendments to the Misuse of Drugs Amendment Bill 2016 have been approved by the Legislative Assembly and commenced. While these amendments will allow for the importation of cannabis oil and for the dispensing of cannabis oil for medicinal purposes, cannabis remains an illegal substance for recreational use. No local production of cannabis oil and/or marijuana will be permitted. The Cayman Islands government does not have any intention or the means to regulate the concentration of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, or the quality of the product to be imported. The THC is the psychoactive component of cannabis, known to exert psychotropic and pain-relieving effects, and is the preferred compound by most patients. In its synthetic form, it is used to treat or prevent nausea or vomiting associated with cancer medicines and to increase the appetite of people with acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS. Madam Speaker, with regards to the types of medical conditions that cannabis oil may be used to treat, this will be determined by the individual prescriber medical doctor. Importation, Madam Speaker, will follow a similar process currently in place in the importation of narcotic drugs and/or controlled substances. The Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Pharmacist currently review applications from eligible importers for the importation of narcotic substances. Once approval is granted, an import certificate is signed and issued by the Chief Medical Officer. Lastly, only registered pharmacists will be allowed to dispense cannabis oil. This includes retail pharmacies, health services authority pharmacies, and pharmacists employed by local pharmaceutical distribution companies. Madam Speaker, while we are taking steps to amend pieces of legislation to allow for the importation of cannabis oil for medical use, as you can imagine, there may be a number of hurdles about how cannabis oil will be sourced and dispensed, as it remains illegal in most jurisdictions, including our closest neighbor, Jamaica. Many, including me, find that surprising, but that is the case. Local doctors and pharmacists may be required to use their own medical experience, judgment, and research to determine what dose will be effective and how to prescribe and dispense cannabis oil. We must give due consideration to the predictable or unpredictable side effects, the level of THC, the combination of compounds and what works for each medical condition, and potential adverse reactions. Despite all these concerns, Madam Speaker, we do not want people to continue to suffer. And so, Madam Speaker, as I stated in May this year, when the policy decision was made by Cabinet to allow the legalization of cannabis oil for medical use, we took the view that it is better to favor hope and compassion over fear. The reality, Madam Speaker, the sad reality, is that for many families, the choice is between death and death. That is a hard pill to swallow, and we believe we must do what we can to help those persons who have not responded to the traditional methods of treatments and give them a last chance at life. Madam Speaker, these amendments represent the efforts of the Ministry of Health and Culture staff, the Attorney General's chambers, and the staff of the Legal Drafting Department. I want to take this opportunity to thank them all, as well as the stakeholder group who contributed so significantly to this work. Madam Speaker, I look forward to receiving the support of all of my colleagues here in this Honorable House so that these important amendments can be brought into effect. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Can I ask you, Honourable Premier, to bring the motion for the adjournment at this time?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the reason for the early adjournment, as I indicated to you, is that a number of members of the House need to travel this evening for differing reasons. And so, given the significant progress that we have made, we've completed 17 bills, and I've just introduced the 18th. I believe we can take the luxury of an early adjournment on a Friday evening, and I therefore move the adjournment of this Honorable House until 10 a.m. on Monday morning.
The question is that the Honorable House to adjourn until 10 a.m. Monday morning. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. Believe the ayes have it. The House now stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Monday morning.